I learned to dread December the year my husband died. Not the month itself, the snow still fell pretty. The pines still smelled of winter promise. But the day, Christmas morning, 1882, when Thomas Garrett ran into a burning schoolhouse and didn't run out. 3 years had passed since then. 3 years of waking alone in our bed, feeding chickens in pre-dawn darkness, watching frost creep across windows I used to find beautiful. The ranch still stood. I still worked it. Fences mended, cattle fed, seasons turning whether I wanted them to or not. I poured coffee into a single cup that December morning in 1885. 1 cup, 1 plate, 1 chair pulled out from the table. Couldn't remember when I'd stopped setting 2. Probably sometime during that first winter, when the silence had finally convinced me he wasn't coming home for supper. The kitchen smelled like wood smoke and old coffee grounds. I'd stopped baking bread. Thomas had loved warm bread, used to tear into it before it cooled enough to slice properly. After he died, I'd made 1 loaf out of habit, pulled it from the oven, set it on the table, and realized he'd never eat it. Fed the whole thing to the chickens 3 days later when it had gone hard as my heart. Through the window, I watched snow begin to fall. Light flakes at first. The kind that wouldn't stick. December 20th, 5 days until Christmas. 5 days until the town would arrive with their wagons full of pity dressed up as gratitude. They'd been coming every year since Thomas died. The entire town, descending on my ranch like I was some kind of monument to their collective guilt. Mayor Patterson with his too hearty voice, Mrs. Henderson with her preserves and pitying smiles. The McCready boys hauling firewood I could have split myself if they'd left me alone long enough to do it. Honoring Thomas's sacrifice. I called it charity I hadn't asked for and couldn't refuse without seeming ungrateful. Without proving I was the bitter widow everyone worried I'd become. I was that widow. Just didn't want them knowing it. I'd managed alone for 3 years. Managed meant different things to different people. I supposed. The ranch still produced cattle. I still paid bills on time. Still showed up at church on Sundays when I could stand the sympathetic looks and careful questions about how I was holding up. Fine. I always said, I'm fine. Lies. But the kind people wanted to hear. The truth was harder. The truth was, I'd learned to make coffee too bitter because I'd forgotten sugar existed. Learned to sleep in the middle of the bed because spreading out made the emptiness feel like choice instead of circumstance. Learned to stop singing while I worked because my voice sounded too loud in all that silence. I'd learned to stop hoping. Mostly. Hope was dangerous for women like me. Hope made you believe things could change. That loneliness was temporary. That someone might fill the space grief had hollowed out. Better to accept what was than to want what couldn't be. But the town wouldn't let me accept it. Every Christmas they showed up to remind me I'd lost something worth remembering. That Thomas had been a hero. That his sacrifice mattered. I knew it mattered. I just wished it mattered somewhere else, to someone else, instead of to me every morning when I woke up alone. 5 more days, I thought, staring at the calendar marked in red ink. 5 more days of forcing smiles and accepting gifts and pretending their kindness didn't make me feel smaller than the snowdrifts burying my fence line. I drank my bitter coffee and watched the snow fall harder. Somewhere. Christmas was probably beautiful. Somewhere. It probably meant joy and family, and the kind of warmth that had nothing to do with fire. Here, it just meant December 25th was coming, and I'd smile and accept. And pretend I was grateful, instead of ashamed, the widow Garrett. Still standing, still managing, still fine, still lying. Christmas morning arrived exactly the way I dreaded it would, with wagon wheels crunching through snow and voices calling cheerful greetings. I didn't feel ready to return. I smoothed my dress and pinned up my hair and practiced my smile in the mirror. Friendly, but not too warm. Grateful, but not desperate. The face of a woman who appreciated help, but didn't actually need it. The face was a lie. Everything about me lately was lies. They came in the usual order. Mayor Patterson first, hauling a sack of flour and coffee like I couldn't buy my own. Mrs. Henderson with her jars of preserves lined up in a basket, each one labeled in her careful handwriting. The McCready boys appeared without being asked, heading straight for the barn to check for repairs I hadn't managed yet. I thanked them, smiled, said the right things, let them pat my shoulder and tell me Thomas would be proud of how I was managing. Managing, that word again. I was starting to hate it. "We have one more surprise this year," Mayor Patterson said, his voice carrying that careful tone men use when they're about to corner you into something. "Robert, come on up here." A young man stepped forward from the group. Maybe 25, maybe younger. Dark hair, quiet eyes. The kind of stillness that suggested he didn't speak unless he had something worth saying. He held his hat in his hands, turning it slowly, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "This is Robert Callahan," the mayor continued. "He's been teaching 3 towns over, but we've hired him here for the school. Thing is, the teacher's cottage won't be ready until spring. We thought that is. We hoped you might consider boarding him until then. In exchange for help around the ranch? Of course." My stomach dropped. A stranger in my house, a man at my table, in Thomas's space. Breathing the air of rooms I'd learned to navigate alone. I wanted to say no. Wanted to tell them they'd finally pushed too far. That I didn't need their interference disguised as kindness. But the entire town stood there watching with hopeful faces. And Mrs. Henderson was already dabbing at her eyes, like this was some beautiful solution instead of an invasion, the mayor added more softly. "Robert lost his whole family in a fire years back. Been alone since. Thought you two might understand each other." The words were calculated to make refusal impossible. Cruel in their kindness. If I said no now, I wasn't just rejecting help. I was refusing to help someone who'd suffered like I had. I looked at Robert. He met my eyes steadily. Didn't try to smile or charm me. Just waited for my answer. Like he already knew I'd been backed into a corner and was too polite to mention. Fine," I heard myself say. "Until spring." Relief rippled through the crowd. Mayor Patterson clapped Robert on the shoulder. Mrs. Henderson started crying in earnest. And I stood there, feeling like I'd just agreed to let wolves into my chicken coop. Except the wolves came recommended by people who thought they knew what I needed better than I did. I showed Robert to the spare room, Thomas's brother's room. Empty for years. Pointed out the washstand, the lamp, the extra quilts in the chest. "Breakfast at 6, I said, my voice flat. "Supper at 6. The rest of the day is yours." "Don't expect conversation," he nodded. No protest. No attempt to negotiate softer terms. Just, "Thank you. Ma'am, I appreciate the roof." His quietness unsettled me. I'd expected pushback. Expected him to try charming his way past my coldness. Men usually did. But Robert just accepted my rules without complaint. Like he understood boundaries were the price of admission. After everyone left, I stood in my kitchen listening to him move around upstairs. Foreign footsteps in my house. Foreign weight making the floorboards creak. Everything about him was intrusion. Reminder. Proof that I couldn't manage alone, no matter how hard I'd tried. That night, I locked my bedroom door for the first time in 3 years. Not because I feared him. Because I feared what his presence meant, that the town had finally won. That I'd become the charity case I'd spent 3 years pretending I wasn't. I lay awake, listening to silence that wasn't quite silence anymore. Someone else breathing in my house. Someone else existing in space I'd claimed as mine through grief and stubbornness and 3 years of determined solitude. The widow Garrett. Still standing. Still managing. Still fine. Still lying. But now with an audience. The first week passed in careful distances. We ate in silence breakfast and supper. Exactly 6 o'clock. Me at one end of the table and him at the other. He didn't try to fill the quiet with talk. I didn't pretend to want it filled. But I watched him. Couldn't help it. Watched the way he moved through my space like a guest who knew he was tolerated, not welcomed. He didn't rearrange anything, didn't try to change my systems or improve on habits I'd developed alone. Just existed alongside them, careful not to claim territory that wasn't his. He fixed things without being asked. The stall door I'd been meaning to repair for months. The loose shutter that rattled in wind. The wobbly fence post by the north pasture. Every morning I'd find something mended that I'd learned to live with broken. I pretended not to notice. Noticed everything. From my kitchen window. I watched him work with my mare one morning. She'd been skittish since Thomas died, shying away from anyone who approached too fast or spoke too loud. I'd learned to give her space. Let her come to me in her own time. Robert stood in the corral, not moving, just speaking softly. Words I couldn't hear from the house. The mare circled him warily, ears flicking. He didn't reach for her, didn't try to force trust she wasn't ready to give, just stood there patient as snow, letting her decide when she was ready to approach. Eventually she did. Walked up to him slow, stretched her neck to sniff his hand. He stroked her nose gentle, still talking in that low voice. And something in my chest tightened, watching this unexpected gentleness. Men and their silences. I thought, sometimes the kindest language. That evening, he broke our usual quiet. Those drawings at the schoolhouse, the children's work tacked to the wall. Those your husband's students. I nodded, wary. They still remember him. I hear them talk. I waited for whatever point he was making. Instead, he asked, "You have students who remember their teachers." "I hope so," he said. "I try to be for them what someone once was for me." The words hung there, weighted with meaning I didn't understand. He didn't elaborate. I didn't ask. But something had cracked in my careful walls, some small fissure that let in light I wasn't sure I wanted. Later, lying awake, I thought about what Mayor Patterson had said, understanding each other. What did Robert understand that I didn't? What loss had carved him hollow? The way mine had hollowed me, the town had sent him deliberately. Not just any boarder, someone specific. Someone they thought could reach through my grief in ways their Christmas gifts couldn't. I resented them for it, resented him for it, resented myself for noticing that the house felt less empty with someone else's footsteps on the stairs. 2 weeks in, I caught myself setting 2 coffee cups on the counter before I'd fully woken. Stared at them like they'd appeared by magic instead of by habit I didn't remember forming. Old patterns, I told myself. Muscle memory from years of marriage. Lies. Myself answered back. The truth was simpler and more terrifying. I was getting used to him. Used to his quiet presence, his careful respect, his way of existing alongside my grief without trying to fix it or diminish it or talk me out of it. I didn't want to get used to him. Getting used to someone meant you'd notice when they left. And everyone left eventually. Death or distance. It all ended the same way you. Alone again, with twice as many rooms that needed filling. But the coffee cups sat there on the counter, paired like they'd never been anything else. And I didn't put one back. January arrived cold and clear. The town's Christmas gifts had been used up, flour baked into bread, preserves eaten, firewood burned. But Robert remained. He made coffee before I woke. Left it warming on the stove, dark and hot. Ready when I came down to start chores. Never mentioned it. Never waited for thanks. Just did it and moved on to other work, like small kindnesses were as natural as breathing. I noticed other things too. Paths shoveled to the barn before I'd dressed. Dishes cleaned while I put away food. The water bucket always full when I reached for it. Small acts that accumulated weight the way snow accumulates into drifts barely visible individually. Impossible to ignore collectively. Our evening meals graduated from silence to something almost like conversation. He'd mention his students' progress, Mary finally reading full sentences, James mastering his multiplication tables. I'd talk about cattle prices, weather predictions, which fence line needed attention come spring. Safe topics, surface talk, but no longer the oppressive silence that had filled my house for 3 years. I caught myself anticipating those conversations, then hated myself for anticipating them. Anticipation meant caring. Caring meant vulnerability. Vulnerability meant another wound waiting to happen when he moved out in spring. Better to stay guarded. Better to keep walls high enough that his leaving wouldn't matter. One evening, mending harnesses by the fire, I watched a student arrive at the door. Young boy, maybe 10, holding a reader and looking miserable. "I can't do it, Mr. Callahan," the boy said. The words don't make sense. Robert brought him inside, sat him at the table, opened the book. For the next hour, I watched patience I didn't know men possessed. He never showed frustration, never made the boy feel stupid. Just found new ways to explain until something clicked, and the boy's face lit up with understanding. "You're good with children," I said after the boy left. Robert smiled, small and genuine. I had good teachers. One saved my life once. The words sat between us like an invitation I hadn't asked for. I could ignore it. Could go back to mending harnesses and pretending we were nothing more than landlady and border sharing. Space until spring. Instead, I heard myself ask, "What happened?" He looked at the fire, shadows playing across his face. House fire when I was 8. Lost everyone parents. 2 sisters. Baby brother. I was at school when it happened. Neighbor ran in. Pulled me from the yard where I'd gone running back. Saved my life by keeping me from going in after them. My throat tightened. I knew that particular grief. The one where you survived, and they didn't. My teacher, Mr. Peterson. He sat with me through the funeral. Weeks after, when I couldn't focus, couldn't care about lessons or anything else, he never gave up. Said the best way to honor the people who save you is to pass that gift forward. "That's why you teach," I said softly. "That's why I do everything." He met my eyes. Thomas saved more than those children that day. He saved everyone they'll become. Every life they'll touch. Every kindness they'll show, that's his legacy too. It doesn't end when someone dies. It keeps growing. I'd spent 3 years believing Thomas's death was noble but ultimately pointless. One good act that couldn't balance the loss of 7 years of marriage. Couldn't fill the empty side of our bed. Couldn't make Christmas anything but the anniversary of the worst day of my life. And here sat a young man who'd built his entire existence around honoring a moment of courage. Who saw sacrifice not as ending but as beginning. That night I took 2 plates from the cupboard without thinking. Set 2 places at the table like my hands had decided something my head hadn't caught up to yet. I dreamed of Thomas for the first time in months. But he wasn't dying in my dream. He was smiling, watching me set those 2 plates, watching me choose to let someone in. When I woke, I didn't know if it was permission or warning. Didn't know if moving forward meant honoring him or betraying him. But the two plates were still on the table, and I didn't put one back. February came in hard, all wind and bitter cold. Robert and I had fallen into rhythms that felt almost like partnership. Almost like something more than landlady and boarder sharing space until spring. That scared me more than I wanted to admit. We were feeding cattle one morning when he said, "I need to tell you something." I wasn't entirely honest about how I came to be here. My stomach dropped. Betrayal, I thought. Some confession that would prove I'd been right, not to trust him. "What do you mean?" My voice came out harder than I'd intended. He stopped, met my eyes steady. "I requested this position, asked the school board specifically to hire me in this town, because—" He paused, took a breath like the next words cost him. "Because your husband saved me. That schoolhouse fire, Christmas 1882. I was one of the children." The world tilted. 3 years I'd carried Thomas's death like a stone in my chest, proof that good men died for nothing. That sacrifice was just another word for pointless loss. And here stood, living evidence I'd been wrong. "You were there," I whispered, 15 years old. Thought I was too old to panic, but the smoke was so thick I couldn't find the door. Mr. Garrett came back in twice. First time got 6 children out. Second time, he came for me and the Finley twins, shoved us through the window. But the roof, his voice broke. I've spent 3 years trying to find a way to thank him. Then I learned about the town's Christmas tradition. And I thought, maybe I could be here. Maybe I could show you that what he did mattered. I started crying then. Couldn't help it. 3 years of believing his death had been noble, but ultimately empty. One act that couldn't balance all. We'd lost. And here stood a man who dedicated his entire life to proving that one act still echoed, still mattered, still saved people years later. You became a teacher because of Thomas. Because of what he showed me, that some acts of courage echo forever. Every student I teach, every child I help. That's Thomas's legacy continuing. His sacrifice didn't end when he died. Eleanor, it's still saving people. I sobbed then. The rigid grief I'd held for 3 years finally breaking into something that could flow. Robert didn't touch me, didn't invade my space. Just sat on the fence rail and let me cry, offering his presence without demands. When I finally quieted, I said, I thought accepting the town's help meant I was weak. That I couldn't honor him properly if I needed charity. "It's not charity," Robert said gently. "It's love. The community bonds he died protecting, that's what they're showing you. Refusing their help doesn't honor him. It denies the very thing he gave his life for." Something fundamental shifted in my understanding then. I'd been carrying shame for the wrong reasons. Had been so busy protecting my pride that I'd missed the point entirely. Thomas hadn't died so I could suffer alone. He'd died protecting community, protecting the bonds that held people together through crisis. Accepting their help wasn't weakness. It was honoring exactly what he'd valued enough to die for. I looked at Robert, really looked at him, not the stranger the town had sent to pity me, but the boy my husband had died saving. The man that boy had become living, breathing proof that Thomas's last act still mattered in the world. "Thank you," I said, "for telling me, for being here, for showing me that his death created more than just grief." Robert smiled, small and genuine. "Thank you for letting me stay, for giving me a way to honor him." We worked the rest of the morning in comfortable silence. But something had changed between us. Some wall had come down, some distance had closed. That night, staring at Thomas's photograph on my dresser. I felt something I hadn't felt in 3 years, looking at his face. Not just grief, not just loss, permission. Like he was watching not in judgment, but in gentle encouragement. Like he was saying, "It's all right. Live." I fell asleep thinking about Robert's words. Legacy doesn't end. It keeps growing. Maybe I could grow too. Maybe that's what Thomas would want. Late February brought a blizzard that came in fast and vicious. I woke to wind screaming around the house, snow already 2 feet deep and rising. The cattle were in the far pasture. They'd freeze if we didn't get them to the barn. Robert appeared in the kitchen, already dressed for weather. "I'll saddle the horses." "You've never worked cattle in a blizzard." "Then you'll teach me." Something in his steady gaze told me this wasn't masculine pride trying to prove itself. This was genuine partnership. Someone willing to follow my lead because he trusted me to know the way. I nodded. "Stay close. If you lose sight of me, stop and wait. Don't try to find your way alone." We rode out into white chaos. I led. He followed exactly as instructed. The wind cut through layers of clothing like they were nothing. Snow stung exposed skin. Visibility dropped to maybe 10 feet on good moments. Worse on bad ones. Finding the cattle took an hour of slow, careful searching. Moving them was harder. They wanted to drift with the wind. Take the easy path, even if it led nowhere good. Robert positioned himself exactly where I directed. Didn't improvise or try to improve on my methods. Just trusted my experience and did what I asked. One steer broke away from the group, heading off into white nothing. Robert went after it without hesitation. I watched him disappear into the storm and felt fear spike through my chest, sharp and sudden and terrifying. Not again. I thought, I can't lose someone else to something I should have prevented. Minutes passed, each one longer than the last. I kept the other cattle moving toward the barn, but part of me stayed focused on that empty white where Robert had vanished. Then he emerged, the steer grudgingly ahead of him. His lips were blue, face raw from wind, but he was grinning like he'd just accomplished something worth celebrating. We got the cattle to the barn, unsaddled horses together, hands so numb we could barely work the buckles, but we'd done it. Saved the herd. Worked as a perfect team. "Thank you," I said, rubbing feeling back into my fingers. "I couldn't have done that alone." "You shouldn't have to do everything alone," he answered quietly. The words hung between us, meaning more than just cattle in blizzards. That evening, warming by the fire with coffee, our hands touched on the cup. Neither of us pulled away immediately. The touch lingered 5 seconds, maybe 6. Long enough to stop being accident. Long enough to become choice. I should pull away. I thought, should maintain the distance that kept me safe. I didn't want to. Later, in my room, I stared at Thomas's photograph. Tried to feel guilt about that lingering touch, about the warmth it had created in my chest. Tried to feel like I was betraying him by wanting someone else's hand in mine. But all I felt was that same gentle permission. Like Thomas wasn't watching in judgment, but in encouragement. Like he wanted me to live, not just survive. I fell asleep with my hand still warm from where Roberts had covered it. Dreamed not of dying, but of living. Woke frightened by how much I wanted that dream to be real. Spring was coming. Robert would move out soon. The teacher's cottage would be ready. He'd leave, and my house would be empty again. The thought filled me with panic I couldn't name. Didn't want to name, because naming it meant admitting I'd let him in. Meant admitting I'd started caring. Meant admitting that when he left. It would hurt almost as much as when Thomas died. And I didn't know if I could survive that kind of loss again. March arrived with the first real signs of spring. Snow melting into mud, days growing longer. Green things pushing up through frozen ground like they believed in futures. Robert's teacher cottage would be ready in 2 weeks. I'd overheard him talking to Mayor Patterson after church. 2 weeks until he moved out. 2 weeks until my house was mine again. 2 weeks until I was alone. The thought made it hard to breathe. We sat on the porch one evening, watching sunset paint the mountains gold and pink. Beautiful in a way I'd stopped noticing years ago. Beautiful in a way Robert's presence had taught me to see again. "I should tell you something," he said carefully. "I've been offered a position at the regional school. Better pay, more influence. I don't know if I should take it." My heart stopped. "You're leaving?" "I don't know." He turned to look at me. "I wanted to ask if you thought I should stay." The question was gentle, but I heard everything beneath it. He was asking if I wanted him here. Not as a boarder, not as ranch help, as something more. Terror flooded through me. If I said yes, I was admitting I'd fallen in love with him. Admitting I was ready to move forward. But moving forward felt like betrayal, like I was choosing to forget Thomas. Like our life together had meant less than I'd claimed for 3 years. "I don't know what you want me to say," I whispered. "The truth. The truth? The truth was, I loved him. The truth was, every time I thought about him leaving, I couldn't breathe. The truth was also that I'd loved my husband. And opening my heart to someone else felt like I was erasing everything Thomas and I had built together. The truth is, I'm terrified," I said, "every time I think about you leaving. I can't breathe, but I loved my husband, Robert. And opening my heart to you feels like I'm choosing to forget him." Robert reached for my hand. This time I let him take it. Let his warmth seep into my cold fingers. "Eleanor, loving again doesn't erase what you had. It honors it. Thomas died protecting children so they could have futures. So they could grow up and love and build lives. Don't you think he'd want the same for you? I don't know how to do this," I admitted, voice breaking. "I don't know how to let someone in without feeling like I'm being disloyal to his memory. What if loyalty means living the life he'd want for you? What if the best way to honor his sacrifice is to accept the gifts it brings, including people who want to love you?" I thought about the town's 3 years of Christmas gifts, how I'd finally learned to see them as love instead of pity. How accepting them had honored Thomas instead of diminishing him. Could I extend that same grace to myself? Could I accept that Robert's presence wasn't replacement, but continuation? I didn't sleep that night. Paced my room until dawn. Crying and raging at the unfairness of having to choose between honoring the past and embracing the future. But slowly, as light crept through my window, I understood the choice was false. The two weren't opposites. They were the same act of courage. Thomas had saved Robert, so Robert could live. Robert living meant Robert teaching. Robert teaching meant Robert coming here. Robert here meant I had a choice, the choice to have a future. Refusing that choice dishonored Thomas's sacrifice more than accepting it ever could. 3 years the town had brought gifts. 3 years I'd seen charity. This year, I finally saw love. Could I see Robert not as replacement, but as the natural consequence of Thomas's courage? Could I accept that my husband's death had created space for Robert's life, and that life could include mine dawn? Broke clear and cold. I knew what I had to do, knew what I wanted to do. For the first time in 3 years. Those two things were the same. I found Robert in the barn at dawn, already working, though neither of us had slept well. He looked up when I entered. set down the tool he'd been holding, waited. "I've decided," I said. He stopped, turned, gave me space to claim this moment. Didn't rush me, didn't fill the silence with assumptions. "Stay," I said. "Please stay." Relief flooded his face, but I held up my hand. More to say. More that needed speaking. "I need you to understand something. If you stay, it's not because I need rescuing. It's not because I can't manage the ranch alone. I've proven I can. You stay because I choose to build a life with someone. Because partnership sounds better than solitude. Because the hardest words, because I love you." They felt strange on my tongue, disloyal and right simultaneously, but I pushed through the discomfort to the truth beneath. Thomas saved your life so you could live it fully. He saved those children so they could grow into teachers and ranchers and parents. Asking you to stay isn't dishonoring his memory. It's living proof that his sacrifice created more than just survivors. It created futures. Robert crossed the space between us slowly, giving me time to retreat if I needed it. I didn't retreat. "I love you too," he said, "and I want you to know I'm not trying to replace him or take his place. There's room in this life for both the man who saved me and the woman who taught me that accepting love is its own kind of courage. The town's going to be insufferable," I said, smiling through tears. "They've been plotting this since Christmas. Probably before Christmas." Robert grinned. "I think Mayor Patterson's been scheming for months." I laughed, then real, full laughter that came from somewhere deep I'd thought grief had sealed shut forever. "We'll give them a wedding to remember." We sealed it with a kiss, gentle and unhurried, the barn door open, morning sun streaming in. Somewhere, I imagined Thomas smiling approval. That evening, I wrote the letter I'd been avoiding for 3 years, to Thomas's mother. Told her about Robert, about falling in love again. Explained that her son's legacy lived in every child Robert taught, every act of kindness that rippled forward from that Christmas morning. I wrote that I hoped she understood. Loving Robert didn't diminish what Thomas and I had shared. It proved that love survives even death, that sacrifice creates more than endings, it creates beginnings. I wrote about Robert's hands, gentle with my skittish mare, about his patience teaching children to read, about how he moved through my space like someone who understood that home isn't something you claim, it's something you're invited into. I wrote that I was inviting him in, and I thought Thomas would approve. I sealed the letter with red wax red like Christmas, like the day Thomas died, like the courage it took to love again. Tomorrow I'd mail it. Tomorrow I'd tell the town. Tomorrow I'd start planning a wedding. But tonight, I sat beside Robert on the porch watching stars appear, his hand in mine, and felt the future open like spring after endless winter. I'd spent 3 years protecting my heart. 3 years building walls high enough that nothing could hurt me again. 3 years confusing survival with strength. But Robert had taught me something Thomas's death never could, that true strength isn't refusing to feel. It's choosing to feel anyway. It's accepting that love means risk. That opening your heart means giving someone power to break it. And doing it anyway, because the alternative staying closed, staying safe, staying alone isn't living at all. It's just a different kind of dying. Tomorrow I'd choose living. Tomorrow I'd choose love. Tonight I'd sit here with Robert's hand in mine and practice believing in futures again. Christmas morning, 1886. The town arrived with their wagons again, but this year they brought decorations for celebration, not charity for obligation. I stood in my kitchen, our kitchen now, watching Robert help children hang garlands and ribbons. 9 months we'd been married. 9 months of learning how two people could share space without one erasing the other. Thomas's photograph still sat on the mantel, but beside it now sat a picture of Robert with his students. Two legacies, intertwined. The house held both past and present without conflict, without choosing, without pretending one invalidated the other. The wedding had been small, but perfect. Mayor Patterson officiated, grinning like he'd won a bet with fate itself. Mrs. Henderson cried through the entire ceremony. Robert's students sang. When Robert said his vows, he promised to honor the man who saved his life by building a life worthy of that sacrifice. When I said mine, I spoke the truth. I'd learned the hard way. I thought accepting help meant weakness. I thought moving forward meant betrayal. But you taught me that the community bonds my husband died protecting include me. That honoring his sacrifice means living fully, not living alone. That there's courage in opening closed doors. Now, watching decorations go up, I felt peace I hadn't known was possible. The kind that comes from integration, not forgetting, from choosing both, not either or. During the celebration, one of Robert's students approached me. Young girl, maybe 9, with serious eyes. "Mrs. Callahan," she said carefully, "do you think your first husband would be happy you married Mr. Callahan?" The question should have hurt. A year ago, it would have shattered me, but now I smiled. "I think he'd be proud," I said. He saved Robert so Robert could live a full life. That includes loving me. That includes building a family. That includes teaching children the way Thomas never got to teach his own. The girl considered this. "So Mr. Garrett is still kind of here." "He's very much here," I said, looking at Robert across the room. In every lesson taught, every kindness shown, every life that continues, because he was brave enough to run into fire. Legacy doesn't end when someone dies. It keeps growing. She nodded like this made perfect sense, then ran off to join the other children. And I stood there thinking about growth, about how Thomas's courage had grown into Robert's teaching, and Robert's teaching had grown into this moment, me, happy, married, part of a community I'd finally learned to accept. That evening, after everyone left, Robert and I sat on the porch watching stars, the same porch where I'd sat alone for 3 years, counting days until I could escape the town's kindness. "What are you thinking?" Robert asked. "I'm thinking about the woman I was last Christmas. How angry she was. How proud and stubborn and determined to suffer alone. And now I understand what she couldn't. That accepting the town's gifts wasn't charity. It was community. That letting you stay wasn't weakness. It was wisdom. That loving again wasn't betrayal. It was the most honest way to honor Thomas's sacrifice." I took Robert's hand, the gesture natural now, easy, right. "He died so children could have futures," I said. "We're living proof that it worked. Every day we choose each other, every student you teach. Every moment we build together, that's his legacy breathing." "And yours," Robert said gently. "Your courage to let love in again, that's your legacy too." I smiled, peaceful in a way I'd never expected to feel again. Next year, when the town arrived on Christmas, I'd greet them with gratitude that was finally real. Not because I needed their gifts anymore, but because I understood what they'd always meant. You don't honor the dead by refusing to live. You honor them by accepting love, by building community, by choosing hope over fear, by understanding that sacrifice creates beginnings, not just endings. I'd spent 3 years believing Thomas's death was the end of my story. Turns out it was just the end of one chapter, the beginning of another. I'd learned to receive the hardest lesson and the most essential. Learned that accepting help wasn't admitting defeat. It was honoring the bonds Thomas died protecting. Learned that loving again wasn't betrayal. It was proof that love survives even death. I'd learned to stop counting losses and start counting gifts, to see continuation instead of replacement, to understand that hearts don't have limited capacity, they grow to hold whatever you're brave enough to let, in most of all. I'd learned that courage isn't refusing to feel, it's choosing to feel anyway. Choosing love over safety, choosing connection over control, choosing to believe in futures even when the past has taught you that everything ends. The stars came out one by one above us, Robert's hand warm in mine. The house behind us holding both our histories without conflict. The future ahead of us uncertain, but no longer terrifying. I'd spent so long protecting my heart, I'd forgotten hearts were meant to be used. Meant to break and heal and break again. Meant to grow big enough to hold grief and joy simultaneously, loss and love together. Yesterday and tomorrow in the same breath, Thomas saved Robert. Robert saved me. And maybe, in accepting that, I'd finally saved myself.